Planet X Games is back with a new spin on an old favorite. Jungle Tomb of the Mummy Bride is coming to Kickstarter Tuesday, May 25th, now compatible for the Dungeon Crawl Classics rule set. The Dungeon Crawl Classics compatible version of Jungle Tomb of the Mummy Bride is designed for a group of 4 to 6 third-level characters and can be used for campaign play and as a one-shot non-competitive module, but also works equally well as a tournament scenario. The Dungeon Crawl Classics compatible edition of Jungle Tomb of the Mummy Bride is now available for the first time in print, both as a hardcover collector's edition and as a softcover adventure scenario. Identical in tone and feel to all those classic DCC modules we've all come to know and love. So be sure to check out the DCC compatible edition of Jungle Tomb of the Mummy Bride from Planet X Games on Kickstarter May 25th.
This is the Vintage RPG Podcast, your source for the best in classic and contemporary RPGs. With your hosts, Hambone and Stu.
Welcome to the Vintage RPG Podcast, coming at you again from the clubhouse hidden somewhere in the swamps of New Jersey. I'm John Hambone McGuire, and with me, as always, is the founder and publisher of Unwinnable. I was surprised when he told me that Baron Munchausen was not a member of Monty Python's Flying Circus, Stu Horvath.
Hi, Hambone.
How's it going, man? I had to work real hard for that joke.
He rides the cannonball, right? It seems like he would be in a flying circus.
It feels Monty Python adjacent.
Well, yeah. I mean, Terry Gilliam was in Monty Python, so it's connected.
The joke was a stretch, and I will admit that. Stu, how you doing today?
Pretty good. How are you?
Doing great, thank you. So if our listeners have not figured it out already, today we're going to talk about Baron Munchausen.
The Extraordinary Adventures of Baron Munchausen, yeah. So I think that everybody knows the movie, the Terry Gilliam movie. Even if they haven't seen it, they might know that through reputation to be like such a cinematic disaster. It was like a huge pain in the neck to make, and it was a huge box office bomb, right? But it's this beautiful, crazy movie. It's my favorite Gilliam movie because it's just so over the top and it's so baroque and covered in jewels and sort of just the film equivalent of A Tall Tale, right?
I mean, it went so baroque, they haven't even made gifts out of it.
And that's what Baron Munchausen does. He tells stories that beggar belief. And that is what the role-playing game is about. So this is the first game in a new style, capital N, capital S, that came out of Hogshead in the late 90s and into the 2000s. They did a series of very small 24-page role-playing games, which was really unusual for the time, especially the 90s. The 90s was all about the biggest possible book that you could put out for your role-playing game core rules. And these things are like little pamphlets, basically. And the idea behind the new style was to just sort of push the boundaries of what role-playing games could be or were considered, and just sort of like playing with, what a role-playing game is. Now, they're super interesting. I think you have to realize that Hogshead was making money day to day by basically reprinting all of the Warhammer Fantasy roleplay stuff from Games Workshop, under license. It was big books, lots of lore, not this. And Baron Munchausen's the first of them. If you had to make a role-playing game about Baron Munchausen, how would you do it, Hambone?
I essentially would think I would try to interpret Don Quixote with the D100 system.
You need a lot of stuff, right? Because he does crazy stuff. You need lots of rules, right?
There'd have to be, because for me, what I base everything on was the movie, and running that movie in my mind as a GM is a logistical nightmare. Like you think about in normal RPGs, how the players are always trying to break the game and it's like herding cats. I feel like Baron Munchausen would be that on steroids.
So that's sort of what I feel like it is too. You're looking at like a Rift style system where it's just like everything is possible. It could go in any direction at any moment's notice, and you have rules accounting for all of that. And you need it for multiple characters because like the Baron has his companions and you're going to go on these crazy adventures, and it's going to be like a telephone book of a rule book. And Wallace has this problem because he really wants to make a Baron Munchausen game, and that's where his thinking is at. He keeps like banging his head against this idea of just like, how do I make this game and do something new with it and yet have it saddled with all of these rules? And he didn't.
He just didn't, just no. Screw
Yeah,
it.
he told me in an interview recently that he was having a shower and he realized that Baron Munchausen stories aren't stories about like crazy adventures. The original stories are written in the voice of Baron Munchausen telling stories. There's stories about an old guy lying. So that is what the game is. It's about a bunch of people sitting around a bar table lying to each other, telling these ridiculous stories, and the best one wins.
I love this game so much already.
The book is 24 pages and it's written by Baron Munchausen. He writes the whole thing and he's full of digressions and ridiculous Baron Munchausen style stories. The rules boil down to half a page. I shit you not. And the assumption is that you're at a bar. Every player has a pool of coins in front of them, one coin for each player. And whoever bought the last round turns to the person seated to their right and says, Baron, tell me the story of X, where X is whatever ridiculous thing they want to put their friend on the spot to tell a story about. So it's like, Baron, tell us the story of the time you wiped out the Turks' army with a whirlwind fart. And then they're on the spot. They have to tell a story for 5 minutes about this thing. And it's not just that. Anybody else could put one of their coins in and add a complication to the story. So like you think you're in the clear, but it's just like, oh, but what about the family of rabbits? It's like, what? Oh, man. And then you have to deal with that. Or you could put one of your coins in and say, no, that's not it. And you're an idiot. I insult you and your family line and go away. Take your coin back. And if they could put another coin in and, you know, raise the stakes, they could take their coin back like a coward, or they could challenge you to a duel.
There's dueling?
I mean, yeah, the Baron recommends that you use sabers or pistols, but he also allows for more civilized time using rock, paper, scissors.
This game is amazing.
Yes, it is.
And it's nothing like I had imagined it to be, especially like looking into it a little bit on the internet. Because, you know, when I went into the Google machine today and I was looking for this game, a picture pops up and it's the Baron fighting Cthulhu. And I'm like, wow, how are you going to make that happen in a game? What a twist.
Yeah. And then play continues around the tables. At the end of the game, you could bow out. You don't have to tell a story, but if you do, you have to buy a round. And at the end of the game, once everybody's told a story, everybody takes the coins that are in front of them and they put them in front of the person they think tells the best story. So the person at the end has a little advantage because they told the story last and because they also know all of the others running, so they can just do their best to top it, which makes it a strategic thing. When you use your coins, you want to always bring the attention back somehow to your own story to keep it in your listener's mind.
So does it break the game if someone tells the aristocrats?
I mean, you're going to have people push back with their money, right? They're going to try and derail you. The beauty of the thing is that the person who wins gets all the money, and then they have to buy a round.
So no one actually loses this game.
Exactly.
Did it win Game of the Year that year and every year? Because it sounds great.
It was the first of the new style games, and it created a foundation for Wallace to put other games out. It's the only new style game that he did, but it allowed him to be able to publish these off the wall kind of books. And it accidentally I don't want to say that it created the story game movement, because there's a lot of stuff that comes before Baron Munchausen that kind of also supports the story game movement. But like, it sort of comes out of nowhere and like is a fully formed story game as we kind of know it now. Like games like Dialect or Fiasco or like all those sorts of games. Like, not only do you read these rules and go, well, this is just like those games. This is like much more stripped down, simple, clear. Like, you cannot screw up these rules. They're just so perfectly like concise. And then the rest of the book is just entertaining you. One of the most delightfully bizarre rule books I've ever encountered, which makes sense because, you know, Baron Munchausen.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like James Wallace did a great job creating something where you almost can't tell a bad story because you have other people who are going to tag in or tag you out on a whim to kind of keep that story going. So, you know, listen, I have definitely sat around the table with some not so great storytellers, and I have been one myself, depending on how many cocktails I had in my body at the time. And that being said, I love the idea that it's still your story per se, but other people can kind of pull things out of you or put things in you and make the story go in fun in different directions. That's pretty cool, man.
Yeah, I do think that the improvisational nature of the game is a little intimidating to me. Like, I just don't think on my feet like that. So like this kind of game terrifies me. You give me a prompt to tell a story and I'm going to freeze like a deer in headlights. Like even me coming up with the Baron, why don't you tell a story about X? It's like, what's X gonna, like, I was thinking about it for like a half hour before we started recording. It's like, I gotta come up with something good, gotta make the people laugh. It's just like, I think that there are so few rules in Baron Munchausen that it's like being at the top of the Empire State Building without a guardrail, you know? Like you you get the fear of the open spaces and the heights all at once and you freeze. I think that rules provide like a structure for games, and like the impulse is to get rid of as many of them as possible. But to do that, like you really are starting to lean on like having like a really great group that really knows what they're doing, that's really on their game that night and has the right amount of alcohol and like verve to kind of just pull this one session off. And it's like you're like the Ocean's 11 heist of, you know, storytelling games, because like all of these things need to line up to like make it awesome. Whereas if you have like a little bit more rules, a little bit more systems kind of like to fall back on to help somebody like me who isn't as good at improv, it's like an oasis. This idea of like super rules light becomes like really hard to play for certain people, which I think is interesting.
Now, do you think it lends itself more to if you are in the vein of, say, someone who can't vamp on the spot and kind of roll with it, you might be better off going later in the row because you're actually able to kind of pull in out of people and it gives you a little more time to think up your story?
Maybe. I also think that this is Dungeons and Dragons disease. I think that if you played role-playing games, and I've said this about indie games and story games in the past, just broadly, I think that once you've played D&D for as long as I have, you get fossilized and your brain just sort of works in predictable ways and you want to calculate THACO and like coming up with story stuff on the, like, it's weird because I run games. You would think that I'm really improvisational, but I have lots of notes.
You do have lots of notes. You had binders and binders and binders of notes.
Yeah.
Like still to this day, like I believe that there are people who go to MIT who do like a lot of really heady math who may not have as many binders as you do full of notes for whatever they're running and whatever program's going on at the time. And kudos to you for that, man, because you killed a lot of trees.
I also love office supplies. So it's like two obsessions meeting. I think that's an interesting thing. And I think that as games sort of have evolved, I think that folks younger than me and less sort of married to simulation style games have an easier time with this sort of thing. I just think that it's wild to me that one of the very first recognizable story games is so fully formed in this extremely rules light way that is so light as to be intimidating.
And let me bring it back a little bit because you said something really interesting before, that the books, whether you're going to run them or not, are just great to read. So talk to me a little bit about how it is as just a book you're going to enjoy that has a very light rule set in it.
I think that's great. I think that Wallace does just a fantastic job. Like he loves Baron Munchausen like the same way that I love Baron Munchausen. A lot of people have watched the movie or know of like Baron Munchausen's been in a whole bunch of stuff. He's like in comic books and cartoons. Like he just shows up. There's a couple different film adaptations, but not many people I feel have read the actual stories. And they're great because they're really just this guy telling absurd stories. He's actually based on a real guy who was,
really?
Yeah, he was like a German nobleman who had like a serious rep for embellishing his time in the army, fighting the Turks. And Rasp, the fellow who wrote those stories, did so anonymously as a send-up of this guy. And the guy was found out about it. He was really upset about it. He was scandalized and considered a lawsuit, but then decided not to because he was a smart man.
Of course.
And decided that it was flattering in the end. But the stories, they're just really wonderful. And it's just this guy just constantly telling just more and more absurd stuff, but he sells it so straight and is constantly like, after the first edition, is constantly just like, and I swear that's the truth. I know it sounds preposterous. I know that you think that I'm crazy, but that's exactly what happened. And it creates like this alternate reality. And Wallace does that in the rule books. Like tone is exactly the same. It's so spot on nailed. If you've read the original stories, it's like 20 extra pages of Baron Munchausen. It's like having an old friend over for dinner, you know?
Yeah, that's great. I tend to think, having rewatched Baron Munchausen maybe about 2 or so years ago, I kind of liken the Baron to David Tennant era Doctor Who, or
Mm.
things that have happened from David Tennant on where, the whole idea that the doctor's a liar and yet he's going to like show up half wasted into the TARDIS. He's like, I think I just accidentally invented the banana daiquiri. Sorry, future. Like, there is something I think that is really kind of special and fun about a character who takes himself way too seriously, but tries to make you believe that he doesn't. So there's something very special about that. So with that, Stu, do you have any final thoughts on the extraordinary adventures of Baron Munchausen?
I think that you should track them down and read them and see if you could play them. And if you could play them, I think that you'll have a blast with it. I think that you should also check out the other new style games if you have any kind of interest in role-playing games as like an art form, a creative medium, because I think that they changed some things. We'll come back around on that. I definitely want to do an episode on Violence, which is the name of the game. It's just called Violence.
Not ominous at all.
Yeah, well, it's hilarious. It really subverts a lot of the stuff that we take for granted about role-playing games and like makes you see them clearly. But like I think that the new style was a fleeting but beautiful moment in the late 90s, early 2000s, and y'all should try and snag them. There's 5 or 6 of them, and they're relatively inexpensive to find, and they don't take up a lot of space on your shelf because they're all about 24 pages.
Well, folks, you heard it right from Stu's lips. Maybe head over to our friends over at Noble Knight Games and see if you can track them down there. Noble Knight, which, by the way, Stu and I definitely do not own. So we're going to debunk that rumor right now. Another fun thing that happened in this episode was, normally at the start of the episode, I'll tell you that we have a new indie RPG elevator pitch brought to you by our friends over at Exalted Funeral. But I was working so hard on that joke, I completely forgot. Well, here we are now at the end of the episode, and we do have an indie RPG elevator pitch from our friends over at Exalted Funeral. And today we've got someone really special here. One of my favorite RPG writers today, a dear friend of mine. He's actually mentored me pretty hard on getting my book to come to life. So without further ado, the legendary Levi Combs. Levi, how you doing tonight?
I'm great, man. How you doing?
Doing fantastic, man.
Hi, Levi.
Hey, man.
So Levi is here with us tonight because how many years ago did you do Mummy?
Jungle Tomb and the Mummy Bride was 2018.
So Levi originally released a killer book called Jungle Tomb and the Mummy Bride in 2018. And now in the year 2021, what are you doing, Levi?
Well, thanks to our good friends at Good Me Games, we're going to go ahead and make it DCC compatible. So you're going to have a Dungeon Crawl Classics version of Jungle Tomb and the Mummy Bride.
Ooh, is there a funnel?
No, it's not a funnel. It's actually a 3rd level adventure.
Oh, yeah, I don't really understand how DCC works. So,
that's like for Dungeons and Dragons, that would be like a 5th to 7th level adventure. Yeah.
Yeah, you survived long enough that you feel like you can do the job, but it's still going to be dicey either way.
No, for sure.
So why don't you talk to us a little bit about the process of bringing your first major creation back to life, albeit in a new, exciting way with DCC?
Oh, for sure. So this was always whenever I'd be on a chat board or at a con or anywhere else, I would always get people approach me or send me a message saying, hey, are you going to adapt this for Dungeon Crawl Classics? Because this would fit really, really good with DCC. And at the time, back in 2018, I didn't play much Dungeon Crawl Classics. I actually wasn't playing much of anything. I was just playtesting. I was trying to get all this stuff out. And so I didn't have much time for other games. But as things kind of slowed down, I really got into Dungeon Crawl Classics. I had some good friends who were playing, and I just kind of jumped in their game. And man, playing DCC kind of makes me feel like it's 1983 all over again. Like I feel like I'm a young kid picking up the dice for the first time. It has kind of a sense of mystery to it, and there's this crazy unpredictability to it, especially with the spells and the mighty deeds. And I just don't encounter that in RPGs much anymore. So adapting this to this rule set, it's like a whole new game. Like I feel like it's a whole new module, that's coming to the fore. And I'm getting an opportunity to do all kinds of new things and just adding in, just different game elements and being able to go back and kind of clean up my old writing, because like any artist, you look at stuff you did, your first project or stuff you did several years ago and you go, you kick yourself in the butt and, just tell yourself, I got to go back and clean that up, man. So, it's been great. And the folks over at Goodman have just been, nothing short of amazing.
So do you consider this like your Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2 because you're going to go back in with a bigger budget, making some cool adjustments and bringing it in a way that it wasn't able to be brought initially?
Well, that's actually a great analogy. Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2. That's fantastic. But yes and no. I was really, really happy with the first Jungle Tomb and the Mummy Bride. I mean, we worked on it a long time. I had a great artist, great layout. Everything just worked, you know. But the one thing about going back and revisiting something you did before is that you're able to kind of fix these little things that, you know, as an artist or a writer that just have bugged you over the years. Probably nothing that anybody who ever plays it or owns it would even notice, but I did because because I'm looking at every paragraph, every page, and trying to figure out what I did wrong or right. Yeah, so it's just been a good opportunity to go back and like I said, kind of fix a few things that personally I didn't care for, and then expand it because it's got an all new cover, it's got tons of new art, and then, you know, I got lucky enough that my friend Carl, Skull Fungus on Twitter and Instagram, he did all the original maps for Mummy Bride, and that he was available. He actually had a brief period where he could do a whole new level.
Nice.
So we wrote a whole new level for it. He is doing the map for that as well, and you know, it's just gorgeous. If you've ever seen any of his stuff, and I know you guys have, but for those who are listening, Skull Fungus on Instagram or Twitter, man, the guy is magic.
He's so good, so effortlessly good. I think you're the person who hit me to him initially. Like, so good.
Got me. I wish that he was available for everything that he did all the time.
You hipped him to too many people, Levi. You got him. You got too many people fell in love with him, and now he's not yours anymore.
I was like, man, you just draw whatever, and I will write around whatever you draw. That's kind of how I feel. Like, he's so good.
Yeah, he's definitely, you know, early contender for GOAT when it comes to map making. And it's something that, you know, you were the one who turned me onto it as well. And everything he does is better than the next.
So good, man.
Of expanded art in this book, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about who else you brought on board to do some art for this book? Because the art in the original was fantastic, as was. That being said, I know you've been working with some killer artists and some real sharks ever since then. So why don't you tell the listeners what they're in for?
The art in the first one was done by a very talented young guy named Adrian Landeros. He illustrated the cover, back cover, all the interior. He was just the killer artist. Some of his original stuff, you know, from the first version, the 5e version, we're bringing over. It's just too good not to include. I mean, there's some stuff in there that it's the first thing we ever did, but I still go back and look at it and just shake my head because it's so cool. But some of the new guys, Diogo Nogueira is nice. Come on. He's been, I've been collaborating with him on several projects over the last couple of years. He's a fantastic, not only a great guy, but a really, you know, fantastic writer. He's a great artist, and he's super, super awesome to collaborate with. He's doing a couple pieces. Del Tiegler is another artist. You may have seen his stuff over in Jeff Talanian's Hyperborea stuff.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, he's done a bunch of work for him, and he's just one of those guys that every time I open up those Hyperborea books and I look at him, I'm just like, I want to work with this guy. Like, it's just so good. He has that real savage sort of Conan, you know, old pulp feel, which I think dovetails nicely into the material, because I consider the material to be very pulp adventure-ish. Yeah, so he's doing some cool stuff. He actually just sent me a really cool sketch of some of the pygmy zombies from the final encounter. And, you know, you think something's cool, and then, you know, somebody else takes the material and they just get so much cooler than you had, you know, envisioned it in your head. And then I'm hoping that Matthew Ray has enough time in his schedule to work on the project. It's kind of a handshake deal. He's agreed to it, but I'm not sure it's going to work out with his scheduling. I hope it does, because I've been a fan of his for a long time, and he's another guy who's just very, very nice. So I'm really hoping that he and I can work something out, and that he just has time, because he's such high demand, and you know, he's just got his own stuff, you know, too. So I'm hoping it works out. So we'll see.
Very cool. So this is going to be on Kickstarter. When this episode airs, it is actually going to be the next day, launched on Kickstarter on the 25th of May. So why don't you tell our listeners about what's up with that and what is in store if they kickstart Jungle Tomb of the Mummy Bride for DCC?
The real draw is if you already have Jungle Tomb of the Mummy Bride, you're getting a lot more with the next version. There's a couple options. You can get a soft cover, like, you know, your standard DCC soft cover. But there's also a hardback collector's edition that has some stunning new art on the front of it. There's all the new art. There's the new level. Of course, with DCC, you have different rules too. So there's 3 new patrons, there's a bunch of new spells, new magic items, new monsters.
But are there charts?
Yeah, there's definitely charts. I mean, it's DCC. You got to have your spell burn charts and your paint your taint and all the good stuff that goes along with what makes the DCC spellcasting so interesting in the first place. With that system, you never know what's going to happen. That's what makes it so cool, and what makes it feel like the old days when you hadn't read every line in the player's handbook and you didn't know what every spell did or what every monster was. There is really a sense of, kind of, I hesitate to use the word wonderment, but, kind of unpredictability to it that really ingratiates itself to me as a kind of an OSR old school gamer. But as far as bells and whistles, there's just stretch goals. There's lots of stretch goals that will expand the material. And there's a lot of stuff that serves as kind of a sandbox to play. So you don't only just have the dungeon, you have a larger world that you can navigate the dungeon in, and then satellite temples and villages and NPCs and different little bells and whistles that you can use to just enhance play all around. So if you have the old one, you can still get the new one and you get a ton of new material. And if you're a DCC player, this is going to have everything that you want in it, as far as in a DCC adventure is going to be in there.
So all this is very cool. Levi, if our listeners want to pick up any of your older material, where can they find it?
You can find it all at Exalted Funeral. The folks over there, they have the entire back catalog, and we're actually doing all of our distro and all of our fulfillment through Exalted Funeral. So there'll be a shorter time between when a Kickstarter ends and when it actually gets out to folks and gets into their store. We've got a couple things that are really hot on the heels of Kickstarters that we've done that are getting ready to hit their store. And it's been a really good relationship with those guys because they're 100% professional, and they really care about the folks that they collaborate and work with, and it's just been a dream working with them.
Very cool. So Jungle Tomb of the Mummy Bride for DCC on Kickstarter, May 25th. Levi, thanks so much for coming out and doing the show with us tonight.
It's great. Thanks.
So this was our indie RPG elevator pitch brought to you by our friends from Exalted Funeral, and this was another great episode of the Vintage RPG Podcast. Stu, where can the people find you?
They can find me on Instagram at Vintage RPG, posting stuff about games like, games. Because like I said earlier in the show, I'm not really good at thinking on my feet. So I'm trying to improv this and I'm crashing and burning.
And Hambone comes in for the hot tag. You can find me on the Twitter and on Instagram at John McGuire RPG. I'm not really on the Twitter that much, but on Instagram, I started watching movies and making little videos about them. Last night, just watched The Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew Meet Dracula. So I highly recommend that one if you haven't seen it. You could also chat us up on our Discord. Vintage RPG has a killer Discord community. We'd love for you to be a part of it. And if you want to join our secret Discord community, which is not so secret anymore, you can become a patron. Patreon.com/vintagerpg. We've got a private Discord community. We've got early release episodes. We've got a behind-the-scenes look at Stu's book, which he is just slugging his way through like a champion. We've also got a look at my RPG 321 action and my first release, Rocket to Russia. We got a lot of cool stuff happening there. Patreon.com/vintagerpg. If you like the show, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe because your reviews really do help other listeners to find us. And we're always grateful when you take the time to review us. So this was another amazing episode of the Vintage RPG Podcast. For Stu Horvath, I'm John Hambone McGuire. May the dice always roll in your favor.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like, review, and subscribe to the podcast. Every review helps other listeners to find us. The Vintage RPG Podcast is a ham-fisted production. Music by Dega West. Art by Schaefer Brown. If you like the podcast, you should also consider becoming a patron at patreon.com.